Hi everyone. Hi everyone. Thank you for your patience. Good to see everyone. Welcome. Welcome. To those who are new here, welcome. To those who are regulars, welcome back. Thanks for coming to the Africa Center. Our mission is to convene artists, entrepreneurs, intellectuals, creatives, and policy ideas, narratives, and investments that accelerate prosperity, freedom, and fairness across Africa and its diaspora. So we're extra excited to have you both here because of your works. We are pleased to welcome Yepoka Yeebo to TAC for a discussion on her acclaimed book, Anansi's Gold, The Man Who Looted the West, Outfoxed Washington, and Swindled the World. Her bio is as follows. Yepoka Yeebo is a British Ghanaian journalist whose work has appeared in Bloomberg, Businessweek, The Guardian, Quartz, and many other publications. She has been interviewed on PRI's The World and NPR's All Things Considered. A graduate of Columbia University's School of Journalism and the University of London, she divides her time between London, UK, and Accra, Ghana. Her first book, Anansi's Gold, was shortlisted for the Mark Linton History Prize, a New York Times Book Review Notable Book of 2023, and the winner of the Plutarch Award for Biography. We're so happy to have you here. Yepoka, yes. Yepoka is joined in conversation by Stuart Reid, editor at Foreign Affairs magazine and author of the Lumumba Plot. Welcome back, Stuart. His bio is as follows. Stuart Reid is a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. He is the author of the Lumumba Plot, The Secret History of the CIA, and a Cold War Assassination, which was named an editor's choice by the New York Times Book Review. It made the year-end best book list of The New Yorker, The Economist, and the Financial Times, and was shortlisted for the Kundal History Prize. Before becoming a CFR fellow, Reid was an executive director at Foreign Affairs, where he worked from 2008 to 2024. He lives in New Jersey with his wife and children. We're so happy to have you back, Stuart. So I'll give them the mic to have a conversation about Yepoka's book, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Yepoka, for writing this book and for being here to talk about it. I want to start by just heaping shovels full of praise on her in this book. It is just a remarkable work of investigative reporting, history, storytelling. It's the tale is a wild tale, and it's also really well told. So everyone who has not picked up a copy right after we're done, please buy her book. It is amazing. I want to start by asking about the origin story of this book, which I understand your mother sent you a WhatsApp message. Tell us how that led to this.
So WhatsApp, especially for the Ghanaian diaspora, is like a place where everybody gets their news. Everybody's in a billion groups with 100 other people they went to school with or went to church with. And so there's a lot of information going through these groups, and some of it is pretty suspect. And so my mom would forward stuff from these groups, initially, and me and my sister would be like, I don't know about that. And so she started forwarding us stuff on purpose to fact check it. And my sister was immediately like, I'm not doing this. Me, of course, I was fully into it. And so she sent a clip of the 60 Minutes interview with Blay-Miezah, which was being rebroadcast at the time. Because it was an election year and they were talking about precedent for people being thrown off of the ballot, and Blay-Miezah was thrown off the ballot when he ran for president in 1979. And so this was going around and she sent it to me, and her question was what do you think of his claims? And I thought it was really odd because I think of my mom as a very, very serious, down-to-earth person. And so I didn't understand why she would think there was any credibility there. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I couldn't stop thinking about her response. And I would like talk to people about it and be like, oh yeah, there are plenty of stories of like politicians like stealing money, stacking it away, it being found in Swiss banks. But also plenty of scams that are exactly like this. And so I started to get really obsessed with what this was and why it is it seems so credible to my mum.
So let's talk about this. So subject of your book, Dr. John Ackah Blay-Miezah, was a Ghanaian con artist. And talk a little bit about the sort of original claim, what happened when Ghana became independent in 1957 and how that sort of set the stage for his scams.
So what happened when Ghana became independent was that there was a great deal of hope and optimism, and there was a lot of stuff happening. Lots of people moved to Ghana to help like build this new, like ostensibly like first independent nation. But it also meant like Ghana was beset by like opportunists and con men and people whose sole aim was to just like loot everything they can and leave. And some of these people were in politics. And while Nkrumah was in power, they did do some considerable stealing. And a good number of them were thrown in jail for it. And after the coup d'etat that unseated Nkrumah, a lot of them would give press conferences where they would say that they had stolen money, but it was at the behest of Nkrumah, or they had bought a house, but it was at the behest of Nkrumah. And they were telling the New York Times that Nkrumah had like gold taps and a house in every African capital and like 32 Ford Thunderbirds and just these outlandish claims, but these were the claims that sort of went around the world after the coup. And so this was like the fodder for Blay-Miezah's claim, which was that he was the heir to a secret fortune stocked away by Kwame Nkrumah. And that if you gave him some money to help get it out of Swiss banks, the fortune was so great that he could return the bulk of it to the people of Ghana and also give you like 10-to-1 returns on whatever you gave him. And that was basically the heart of it. Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about the victims. I want to quote from you. You have this wonderful line you say of Blay-Miezah and his partner Robert Ellis. You say, to black people, they were selling liberation. To everyone else, they were selling colonialism. What do you mean by that?
In the beginning, a lot of the people around Blay-Miezah, this is probably one of my favorite details, but he traveled to Philadelphia, checked into the Bellevue Stratford Hotel and had a great time, but did not pay his bill. And so he was eventually like arrested and charged with defrauding an innkeeper. And while he was in jail, he met a priest named Woodruff, and Woodruff was sort of a remarkable Episcopalian priest who was weird. He didn't really have like a parish. He was like on the streets of Philadelphia working with community groups, like running sittings, taking over churches, desegregating spaces, that kind of thing. And Blay-Miezah told him his story, that he knew Nkrumah and that he was tasked with this like onerous but great duty, like to bring this money home, and this money would transform Ghana, and this money was also an opportunity for like people in Philly, black people in Philly, to invest in Ghana and also make a great deal of money while building a nation. And so a lot of his initial investors were like black businessmen in the Philadelphia area, and they became sort of a community. They had like meetings, they all hung out together, everybody knew each other. One of the children of one of the investors told me they had like t-shirts, and everybody felt like an auntie and uncle, and it was like a really warm, he thought of it very, very warmly. Then there were the other investors who were promised like 100-to-1 returns, and also the ability to like buy a swathe of Western Ghana, build a monorail, build a TV station, just scads and scads of money. And so ostensibly, they were returning this money to Ghana, but it was like via their pockets. Those were the two groups of investors, and somehow this wasn't a contradiction. Some of them met and mixed, and some of them were siloed from each other, so they really didn't realize they were being sold different stories.
Reading in the present day, thought I kept having is how could these people fall for this? That's just I mean, this was a pre-Google age. You couldn't really put something stuff up as easily. But I kept just wondering, really, are you that stupid? You thought stupid? Listen stupid. I'm changing it. What's yours? But not everyone. There has to be some explanation. Why we're falling for this so easily?
So greed, probably the biggest thing, and people, it was like, they were told they get weeks, sometimes months, and no longer. People would even put in small amounts of money, just like 1,000 here or there, because they thought they'd get 10 times that, immediately. Other people would go and do some research, like they hear a story about Nkrumah hiding away money, and then if you like went to the library and asked them to pull up research on Nkrumah, you'd find the stories about like the gold beds and the girlfriend in every port and that kind of thing, and you'd conclude that Nkrumah probably stole a ton of money. Then I think a lot of investors really enjoyed the fact that it was like a spy movie. Like they were going to all these different like finance capitals. They were trying to convince government officials all over the world to help them get hold of their money. They saw documents and witnessed things that convinced them that they were involved in this sort of great conspiracy, but also this great like financial movement. And also Blay was like brilliant and charismatic and very, very good at keeping people close and keeping the illusion of being like incredibly wealthy and incredibly connected and incredibly powerful up. Like they'd take investors on visits to Ghana, and he'd have it arranged so there were like billboards for the Oman Ghana Trust Fund like down the highway that they would inevitably like drive down. They would genuinely meet with government officials and people with quite like connections, and it would seem incredibly legit. And anytime anybody got the jitters or asked questions, they get a call from somebody like rich and powerful convincing them to keep their money in. And it's not that people didn't realize that something was off and drop out all the time. It was just lots and lots of people stuck it out until this day, believe that the money is there and someday it will come out. Some of them believe that like Blay was a crook, but the money was real. Some of them think of him incredibly fondly. Even people who lost a great deal, people who lost their houses, whose families no longer talk to them, still think of them really fondly, because like in the meantime, they had an adventure, they got to see the world, it was a whirlwind. Yeah.
You touched on something that a feeling I had as a reader, and I'm wondering if you had it as a writer, which is, I mean, obviously he's a despicable character in many ways. People lost their life savings, he ruined people's lives, deeply unethical, complete liar. And yet, there were times reading this, I sort of admired what he was doing. Helped me feel less guilty for having that.
No, I felt the same way, especially in the beginning when I didn't know some of the darker stuff, like his involvement with like the Rawlings, I guess government, but he was a dictator, so it wasn't really a government, and gun running, the darker stuff that was intertwined with this. Like in the beginning, it just kind of seemed like he'd Robin Hooded his way through Philadelphia and New Jersey, and also London, like Berlin. And it was just, he was charming and funny and got away with a lot. He defrauded multiple hotels and lots of different places. He always knew how to like get out of a tight spot by either like charming his way out of it or doing whatever he had to. Like the time he was arrested in Ghana and he convinced the jailers to take him to the bank and then just like went to use the bathroom in the bank and drop through the like bottom of the latrine. That was my favorite escape of his, actually.
So many moments where you think the walls are about to close in, and then he miraculously reinvents himself, escapes, comes up with a new excuse. I loved how the regime changes in Ghana were incredibly convenient for him, because all of a sudden he can say, oh, now all my contacts are no longer responding to me. Take us a bit behind the scenes in terms of your reporting process for this. What were the sources you drew on? I know a lot of some of them were interviews. Who did you interview? Tell us about that.
I interviewed basically anyone who would speak with me. So a lot of people who either worked for Blay-Miezah or investors who were still around. A lot of them did not want to be on the record. They didn't really want to be associated with what had happened. But again, they still talked about it like they had a great time and talked about Blay-Miezah with a great deal of admiration. One of the most remarkable sources was a man named Peter Rigby, who lives in Hackney in London, and basically was Blay-Miezah's like cameraman, all-around tech guy for over a decade. And he had like audio and video, but he had also spent so much time with Blay-Miezah and spent so much time sort of processing everything he had been through that he had written extensively about it, like thousands upon thousands of words about like what he'd seen, what he'd been through, realizing he had accidentally run guns, like smuggling things in typewriters and hollowed out like VHS recorders. He also like went and did a ton of research into Ghanaian history and tried to figure out like what it was that was happening, like where this money came from, what it was. He convinced himself it was like actually the proceeds of a colonial bond, and also that like he figured out at one stage that the next person to be in charge of the fund was going to be Kofi Annan. And so he was just waiting for that to happen. And then when he died, he like spent a lot of time trying to figure out who the next person was. Like he was a fantastic source.
And he's still a believer, right?
He is, yeah. Last time I spoke with him, after the book came out, he was like, obviously we don't agree on anything. And he posited that maybe I had been paid to write this book and discredit Blay-Miezah, which is not the case. And he was still a firm believer, and I don't think anything I could have written would have changed that. Yeah.
You also interviewed Blay-Miezah's wife, Gladys, right? Who's this interesting character in her own right, who's sort of the only person who actually can outfox her husband. Tell us about her involvement with the project and what she was like.
She was a remarkable woman. She got married to Blay-Miezah when she was sort of relatively young, and she said sort of naive, so she didn't quite realize what she was getting into. But she's incredibly like intelligent woman and a quick study, so she immediately started to figure out kind of the contours, also because he cheated on her relentlessly, and she had to navigate that. I guess at the time it was something she felt she had to navigate, and so she spent a lot of time like getting the drop on him and befriending his girlfriends and making sure he knew that he couldn't do anything without her knowing or realizing. Well, I guess do anyone without her knowing or realizing. So she was incredible to interview. Like after all this, she still had like a fantastic life. Like she obviously like was left with nothing after Blay-Miezah died, and so she had to like start working, and she moved to Liberia and she made like political connections there and had like a whole fascinating life. She was quite close to Charles Taylor, impressively. And so she was like incredibly guarded, but also she had fantastic stories. Like she would like fly halfway across the world to catch him with a girlfriend he swore he like broke up with. She once scaled the walls of his mansion in London because he wouldn't let her have her kids back. And at that point, even like his security guards were like, "We can't interview." Like, and so she had all these wonderful, wonderful stories, but she was also very clear that people would hand her like wads of cash and she didn't quite know what she was into, and she wouldn't like, she just faithfully like keep the money and give it to Blay-Miezah. She'd watch all this stuff happen around her, and she said wasn't quite aware of the gravity of it all until very late in the game. Also, like, I know she was very guarded because maybe a couple of days later, I went to do another interview with someone, and I speak Ga, but people assume that I don't. And so this person like took a phone call in Ga, and he was talking to her, and she was like, "Oh, is she there? What are you telling her?" Like, so I get the sense she was keeping kind of tabs on me and what I knew, which I appreciate. I understand why you do that. So I also get the sense that she like saw more and knew more than she let on, and that like I hope one day she tells us all like what that was, because she has a phenomenal story to tell. Yeah.
You mentioned, and we'll open it up into Q&A in a second, so think of your questions. You mentioned Charles Taylor. One of the delightful things about your book is all these sort of cameos, these characters you do not expect to encounter in a book like this pop up. Could you just walk through some of them for us?
Shirley Temple Black, the child star who became ambassador to Ghana, was probably the first one I saw. Henry Kissinger.
I was just going to suggest that.
Yeah, Henry Kissinger, wanting people not to like stand him any more hotel stays, but also asking about whether there was any research into like stolen money or gold during the Nkrumah era. Lots of very prominent Ghanaian politicians. Krobo Adusei is probably my favorite, because he was pretty shameless about how corrupt he was, but also another person who was constantly like whose wife got the drop on him. She was the one who like famously purchased a gold bed in full view of the British media, while there was lots of foreign reporting about Nkrumah's government being corrupt. Jewel Ackah, a Ghanaian musician, that's also one of the first ones I found. Like, he was the leader of the band that basically followed Blay-Miezah around the world, and also made a record in his honor. gosh, who else is there?
John Mitchell,
John
Nixon's Attorney
Mitchell.
General, who most of us
Yes.
probably didn't think of with Watergate. He pops up in this. It's just a wonderful, you meet these great characters, and then also just the way you weave Ghanaian history through the whole stories. I think it functions also as a sort of history of Ghana from 1960 to the 90s. With that, why don't we open it up for questions from the audience about this remarkable book? And again, afterwards, you all have to go buy a copy of her book.
Thank you.
Should I? Okay, we'll start there and then go there.
Thank you for the introduction. My first question, well, actually, I'm not going to use this. I'll give it to you. My first question is, you kind of mentioned like the Liberian connection early on, and my question kind of relates to: do you see any Americans funding other African nations similar to how they did in Ghana, knowing that that's how Liberia kind of came into existence? In a sense, if that makes any sense.
Yes. Like through, I guess, legitimate and expected channels, but also through less legitimate channels. The thing that underscored a lot of this, and I guess also answers the question, like why would people do this and why would people fall for this, is that at the time, a lot of similar schemes would actually pay out. Like people would invest money in this way, like something that seems a little shady and a little hard to define, and they would get their returns. Now, those would be like dirty money, like money that was being laundered, money that was being like transferred for less than legitimate reasons, but yeah, they would do this, and some of this money would, an investigator told me this, some of this money would go on to like build cities, build countries. So absolutely, and I suspect it still happens pretty commonly. I think it's clear that a lot of, I guess, development is dependent on networks of like shady cash, and people with motives that aren't just like, we'll build a road and we'll help build a nation. Like people are always investing in Africa to like make a buck. Yeah, so fully, yeah. Thank you.
The lady right here.
I have two questions, right? One of them is similar to this first question, but I think sure. Okay, yeah, sure. So the first question would build off of the last one. So do you know of current present day countries where, you know, some of this shady investment is going on in Africa? I mean, is it still going on in Ghana? I mean, I think you did mention that briefly.
It is, yes. And there are pretty regularly scandals about it in Ghana. I guess the biggest and most obvious example now is gold mining. As the price of gold has like gone through the roof repeatedly, the number of like illegal wildcat mine. Well, I say illegal, some of these are sanctioned by like local authorities or local chiefs or people in power. But these mines have basically pockmarked sections of the entire nation, killed several bodies of water, leached toxic chemicals everywhere. And this is, like I said, stuff that is sanctioned sometimes by politicians and involves a great deal of like international investment, even when it's ostensibly illegal. Like you can't just dig up a forest, but they are all the time.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so then the last question would be about, I think you said there was an influx of people migrating into Ghana in the 1980s. And where were they coming from? Was that mostly in America?
Oh, that was primarily the 1960s.
Oh, it was 1960s. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so, yeah, there were a lot of like Black American people who moved to Ghana, like most famously like Maya Angelou. Obviously, like W.E.B. Du Bois, like is buried there. Yeah, there were a lot of people from all over the world who like saw it as like a bastion of something new and a chance to build like an African nation after colonization. So yeah, people came from all over, and also like Nkrumah was clandestinely like financing lots of movements, like independence movements. So lots of people would come to Ghana to like train and learn and prepare, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. So are you saying that it's primarily from the United States, or is it across the world in the 1960s?
Oh, it was across the world. I think a
Okay.
lot of the most famous names were from the United States.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I got your book when it came out in 2023, and I couldn't put it down because my mother went to school in the Western region where he was from, and she has a memory of him landing an aircraft in a schoolyard with people yelling that thing. So my mother she actually experienced that. So she loved your book too. My question is his son. I see his son on social media, and he's been interviewing the Rigby character, the guy. Have you spoken to his son? Was he involved at all in you writing this book? And I don't know if he's doing a documentary on his dad, but it looks like he's putting something together. I was just wondering, are you involved at all in that?
His son is like a filmmaker, and yeah, I know he's working on something. I did interview him briefly. Like I met him while I was researching this, like in Atlanta, and yeah, he was again very guarded, but he was also, I think, probably the person in the family most charged with like carrying his father's legacy. And so when we spoke, he was both very like clear-eyed about what had gone on, but also like still felt like there was a legacy there to defend. Yeah, and so I know that like he's probably not thrilled with the content of the book. And I'm really curious to see this documentary. Like, I know that there are lots and lots of people that like he basically grew up in this, so there were lots of people he's really, really close to, and I think could probably speak to him quite candidly about what they went through. Yeah. So I think that'd be wonderful.
Because I've seen a few things where he's starting to portray his dad in a very positive light when he starts off. And I have spoken to my mother, she was like, we all knew what he was up to as kids going. We had stories about him. So I don't know if you'll be able to twist the minds of those in Ghana who were born in the 50s and 60s and did experience Rawlins and Blay-Miezah and all of that. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other run here?
Quick question. Just when you were doing research on this, do you become aware of any other kind of grand schemes that were happening in other parts of Africa at that time, maybe in the Western or East?
Yeah, there were breadcrumbs of things that I never got to look into, especially in like the State Department cables. There was just lots of stuff that was redacted, and lots of cables that were missing that I could never get a hold of. So I get the sense that there were lots of scams happening. There was one set of cable called Les Ballets Africains, which I know was the name of like a touring troupe of dancers at the time, but also seemed to refer to something else that was going on. And that's like stuck in my head because I tried really hard to get hold of that and never could. But yeah, I get the sense that he was not the only person doing this. And I know that subsequently there have been lots of people in other African countries sort of as part of this. So like as part of the Ghana Trust Fund. there are countless scams out there, like, and I feel like we only know a tiny bit of what's going on in the world at any time. And it's the most frustrating thing about doing this kind of work. It's so under-researched and under-reported, and there's just so much material that like doesn't get looked at. There just need to be lots more people researching and writing and rooting around and trying to get things that are redacted, unredacted, and get a hold of these things and get a hold of these like documents. Yeah.
Do we have other questions? I see one in the back, and then we'll go there.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Jess Wuni. I'm from the Permanent Mission of Ghana. And just wanted to first thank you very much for this really, really wonderful book. Growing up in Ghana, as she has said, we all grew up with stories about Blay-Miezah and all that. And having put it in a book, I'm now itching to get a copy and to read it. And just to also provide a context to a question earlier on asked about Nkrumah and why perhaps you had a lot of people coming into Ghana in the 60s and the 80s, in the 60s and the 50s. And just to indicate that Ghana around that time was the first independent Black African nation. And Nkrumah had this idea that the Black man was capable of managing his own affairs and to create a Ghana that showed the Black man at the helm. And so this idea that we needed help from everyone who was willing to pitch in and to develop Ghana as, in his words, as a shining star of Africa. And in doing so, Nkrumah believed that the independent, in his famous statement, he said, the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up to the total liberation of the African continent. And so his idea of ensuring that the independence of Ghana wasn't only limited to Ghana, but other African countries. And so he spent his time, effort, and the resources of Ghana to ensure that other African countries were liberated. You can talk about the help he gave to countries in Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, and all that. So it wasn't clandestine, as it was a deliberate policy and a deliberate foreign policy of Ghana to ensure that other African countries were liberated. And so if you look at it in that context, it stands to reason why you had all these Black intellectuals from the diaspora coming into Ghana and to provide an ideological backing to what was taking place in Ghana at that time. And also to talk about this idea of illegal gold mining and investment in that field. It's indeed a concern that we have the incidents of illegal gold mining taking place in Ghana in recent times. But I would not describe it as shady investments coming from outside. It's indeed a concern that because we have had a lot of development in terms of ways of mining gold, the incidence of gold mining has become rather rampant, and the government is doing all it can to be able to contain the situation. But I won't describe it per se as shady investments coming in.
Do you have any response?
I have to argue with that. For decades now, And I fully appreciate your comments. The liberation movements are indeed like a great part of Nkrumah's legacy, and one of the most frustrating things about like researching this book and the claims Nkrumah made and the claims Blay-Miezah made was that they didn't come out of thin air. They were built on this scaffolding of like slander and lies that were like very deliberately built up by the people seeking to like tear him down, limit his reach, that kind of thing. And so it's not like, no, it was more like his legacy had been tarnished by those claims, and tarnished enough that like to this day people question whether like the story is true, Nkrumah really did hide away money, that kind of thing. And that's a pretty galling thing to do to like one of the founders of a nation. And yeah, that was an incredibly frustrating part of researching this. About the gold. I don't know if people have seen the images.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Ghana. I go between the places, and my husband works in aviation, so we've actually put on a plane and gone over some of the water bodies, and it's incredible. My family's in the central parts of Ghana, so you hear stories about farming and like the things they used to mine, and we read some books about it. I mean, Mother said, this is right off of Mother said, and Stuart Reid.
Yeah.
And the whole investigation, and there's a whole chapter of this book when he talks about like governments going around MPP and even the governments before when they give foreigners, even locals, licenses to prospect protected land. Prospecting becomes, you've gone in, no one knows what they're doing. Next thing is, it's called Ghana safe for a reason. We all, those of us who are family in Ghana, like you don't just hear these stories, you see these things.
Yeah.
And the water bodies, I have an activist in fact that they don't get drinking water much. They have to buy water now. Because they're the access
Yeah.
to water is kind of ridiculously high in talents and they have on hills. So they can have drinking water. So it's a life issue. And there's, I mean, I can spend hours talking about this, but it's a life issue.
Yeah.
The government needs to do its best to try and maybe prevent some of it, but it's a pretty big issue. And people, what family members who are struggling with it, like food produce and things are, the prices of those farms are being affected. So it's a pretty, and talking about investments, there's groups of people who come in and do this. Well, when they're arrested, they're not prosecuted. We find all sorts of excuses now. They will not touch this Chinese person because somehow this person goes out of the country, comes back home to continue their legal manner. So it's a really bad issue that a lot of us who come from the Chinese diaspora have family members who are almost like
Yeah.
it's really bad. So I mean, it's going to have this to fix it, but we are aware that it's a whole issue and it's caused bigger demonstrations about it.
Massive demonstrations. Yeah. And sorry.
Yeah, do you have anything to add to that, or should we go to the next question?
No, that was everything. Yeah, like people don't have drinking water. People can see bodies of water contaminated by silt and chemicals. Like we were talking about this. Like my dad is from a village outside Bolgatanga. It's a very quiet village. There's one road going through it. There's still a gold mine somehow, all the way up there. It's pretty devastating, and I think minimizing the cost to the country is dangerous because it limits our ability to do anything about it while that's still possible. And it's quite rapidly, obviously, getting to the point where people don't have drinking water. So now is probably the time. Yeah, that's all I had to add to that. Yeah.
We had a question right there.
But my first question is, do you know if there would be similar kind of situations unfolded after we gained independence as another Black nation that gained independence before surrounding nations? Or do you think there was something unique about the time period of the 60s, 70s?
So I don't know of any specific examples that were like this, but I do remember when I was doing my research in Philadelphia, I got into just like a completely random conversation where somebody told me Stephen Girard, who was like a very prominent Philadelphian, where all these like schools, like roads, things in Philly named after him. The story was, like the urban legend was, that he like stole a great deal of that money from Toussaint Louverture. And so like I did a tiny bit of digging, and there was like a court case in the 1800s where Louverture's like family did sue. And it's like a fascinating case, but like in the end, they just concluded that there wasn't enough proof on either side to make the claims. But yeah, the way people tell it, Louverture's like decline and Philly's rise tied together by this scam. Yeah, that's the one example. I'm sure there are more. I'm sure there are so many more.
Oh, sure. Read this short essay by a Nigerian living in the diaspora who went home and said upon arrival she very quickly understood like the kind of how corruption happens while like coming from the Western understanding, Western involvement in politics, but also understanding how we grow our own politicians. Was anything kind of insightful to you in your research that helped contextualize that fine line between like Western involvement and opportunism, and also kind of the ability for that homegrown like scammer vibe?
I think the main thing I realized was that like Western corruption is pretty much the same. We just call it a different thing because racism. Like it still happens at the same scale, with the same frequency. It's just we frame it differently when it's Africa, and we also attribute lots of bad stuff to it when it's Africa, as if the same thing isn't happening like here or in the UK, as if people aren't like using money to get what they want done, using money to control politics, using money to like bulldoze their way through people's lives, using money to like grease whatever it is that they need greasing. That was the main thing, because I was just stunned by how many scams were happening around like Blay-Miezah's associates in like the US and in like the UK. Like they had, like a lot of them had lives full of like scamming before they met Blay-Miezah, and that's probably how they came to meet Blay-Miezah. There was like an organized crime network already like around him that he would sort of plug into. So yeah, the main thing I learned was that everybody's at it. It's just framed in a racist way when it's Africa. Yeah.
I think we have time for one or two more questions, and then I know Yepoka would be happy to sign copies of her book. So are there other questions from the audience? Yes, over there.
Thank you. Yes, I have a question about, you mentioned the frustrations that you experience in the process of writing, and also the guardedness of his ex-wife, where you felt you couldn't go any further. So I was curious about when did you decide, I've got enough content, I'm gonna write this? Like, what was that point? And is there, sort of more leads that you'd love to explore further?
So my friend over there, Jack, is laughing.
Hi, Jack.
Because like he had to intervene to stop me researching at like several times towards like the end of the process. Basically everybody had to intervene to stop me researching several times at the end of the process, because there was just like, there was always more, and there were always questions I had, and there were always like digressions that were interesting to me. And so I got as much of the story as I could and wrote through that, and then that would throw up a whole other bunch of questions, and I would write through that, and then like each little bit I'd be like, oh, I wonder like what the crockery looked like at the hotel. I wonder what this person did before they met Blay-Miezah. And like, so I'd go into these like micro obsessive trawls through things, and it just got to the point where people were like, please stop. Please just write the book. Yeah, no, at one point I was looking stuff up, minor stuff, I swear, but like literally before it was going to press. Yeah, so everybody around me is a tiny bit scarred by that, I think, maybe. But yeah, and I could probably still go looking for stuff now. I'd still want to try and talk to people who were guarded the first time around. Like, even if it's just so they can cuss me out for half an hour, like, I have questions, they have answers, yeah.
Well, we're grateful your friends intervened so that you could write this book. Does anyone have a final question? Okay, we'll take it from there. And then again, Yepoka will be signing books. So, yes.
Final question. I mean, there's just so much to unpack here. First of all, I mean, I can't wait to read the book, because it seems like I'm going to learn a hell of a lot about it. You know, there have been a lot of scams that people talk about in Africa, and now we come to 2025, and the lady up here asked about people migrating there, and you talk about the 60s, but we also know that recently Ghana has been really attracting a lot of people from the diaspora to go there. And so I'm just wondering whether, you know, how we're gonna, what image they have of Ghana and other African countries in terms of whether they're gonna be scammed. And then we talk about the gold, you know, there is illegal gold mining, but there's also investors who want to go and do it the right way and not pollute water. And so I think that side of it also has to be shown, because Africa is looking for people to go and invest, whether it's the diaspora, on whether it's big companies, organizations who want to go and invest. And I mean, I've been all over Africa in a previous life, and these scams do happen. I mean, everyone is just trying to get a piece of you, even your own family. It's a really interesting environment. But so for the people from the diaspora, big corporations going there, they read your book, they hear these stories. I mean, I didn't even know Nkrumah was a bad guy, because I mean, my whole impression of him was that, you know, he was a founding father of not only Ghana, but the whole of Africa. So you didn't answer the question whether he was stashing all these things, because you've planted this issue, you planted that. And so I'm wondering, was he as corrupt as you're suggesting? Because it's my ignorance, but you left it hanging, and I think we should kind of, you know, clarify that.
I thought I made it clear that these were stories told about Nkrumah. And so when I saw the claims in the papers and who was making them were like largely people Nkrumah had thrown in jail for corruption, I got curious about like what happened next. And so there were a series of inquiries into Nkrumah's alleged corruption over the years, like going well into the 70s. And the first was basically done by the people who unseated him. So there were lots of people making gigantic claims about, like, somebody said that Nkrumah had forced them to open a bank account in a Midland bank branch in London and stash money in it. And then over the years, they just like gently walk back the claims. They'd be like, I never saw the gold taps, or, okay, well, I opened this bank account in the Midland Bank in London for myself. One person had claimed that Nkrumah had like asked them to open a Swiss bank account and put money there, and then in a subsequent inquiry said, okay, fine, it was my money, because he couldn't prove that Nkrumah had asked him to do this. And then the judge was basically like, okay, go get the money and bring it back and give it back to the government. And so the guy was like, fine. And then in the final bit of the inquiry I could find, the judge was like, so where's the money? And the guy was like, I'm sorry, I've been unwell and unable to leave the country. And I knew for a fact that he had just gotten back from Switzerland, where he was with Blay-Miezah. Like, these people were running a long con that went decades just to protect the money that they had stolen in Nkrumah's name. And in the end, Nkrumah, like, after he was unseated, he was living in Guinea, like, living a very modest life. His secretary and editor would have to send him sardines. Like, when it rained, he would just move his bed across the room and put a pan down. Eventually, he was diagnosed with cancer, and he died in Romania with his nephew and his bodyguard, who were apparently they didn't even have kids. They were just wrapped in threadbare hospital gowns. And what I could find of his will was incredibly modest. It was basically just the proceeds from the books he had written. He lived an incredibly modest life, despite all the wealth he had access to. And there was never any concrete evidence that he had stolen money, just lots of people saying he had stolen money to cover the fact that they had stolen money. So I'd love to make that very, very clear. I think I am fascinated by this idea that if you write about one scam, it paints the whole nation as a nation of scammers. I tried very hard to make it clear that while scam is fascinating, scammers are fascinating, scams are fascinating. In Ghana, a lot of people had to kind of especially in tough times, find end runs around society, either having been collapsed or not being able to get the things they need to survive, that kind of created a slightly, a culture of finding your way around things, which ultimately shades into scamming. It doesn't mean it's a nation full of scammers. It doesn't mean you will get scammed if you move there. Obviously, we all have examples of being individually scammed or tough stuff with family. But I think that's the case everywhere. Everybody has tough stuff with family, family who need help, family who end up scamming them. And it's just incredibly messed up that people feel that this is somehow a uniquely
Please join me in thanking Yepoka for this fascinating conversation. And buy her book. It's really good.